back, and we are going to talk next about a subject that honestly I think is of absolutely surpassing importance. The reality is that if we don't take care of the most critical of our critical infrastructures, nothing else that we might be concerned about is going to matter. Because if, as a result of our inattention to known and yawning vulnerabilities of our electrical grid, that collapses, perhaps for a sustained period of time, the country as we've known it will be done. It will certainly be many years, if at all, before it is back on its feet. And there will be a tremendous loss of life associated with it. My colleague at the Center for Security Policy, who is our Director of Infrastructure Security, is Colonel Tommy Waller, United States Marine Reserves, Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller. He is one of our duty experts on the various challenges that our electric grid is facing and has been leading a marvelous effort that I'm very proud of at the Center for Security Policy. We call it the Secure the Grid Coalition, now for the better part of a decade. And what Tommy is doing with that coalition is trying to make sure that the best minds in the country are brought to bear on both identifying problems with a lack of resiliency in our electric grid and corrective steps taken wherever possible as urgently as possible, lest, again, we suffer a catastrophic grid down threat. We're going to talk a little bit with him about a very important presentation he made earlier this week, now last week, to the Secretary of Energy and her advisory board, and about other aspects of the portfolio of the Secure the Grid Coalition. Tommy Waller, it's good to have you back with us. Welcome, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. I appreciate it.
Tell us a little bit about this. This is now, I guess, a running uh, interface that you've had with the Secretary of Energy's advisory board.
Yes, sir.
What was your latest presentation about, and how was it received, Tommy?
Well, first of all, Frank, I do have to commend the Secretary of Energy, number one, for having an advisory board, and secondly, for being willing to accept public commentary. Uh, we have, as you mentioned, made this a tradition. They do a meeting each quarter. Our Secure the Grid Coalition, either at least myself and then other members at some points, join the Secretary's advisory board meeting to make those public comments. Normally, we get about 3 minutes. They actually gave me almost 6 minutes this time. And it is worth your viewers maybe watching. I did just author an article published at the Center for Security Policy's website that explained that less than 1/3 of a percent, that's 1/3 of 1% of Joe Biden's infrastructure bill could actually prevent certain collapse of the electric grid. It's, Frank, as you know, and you've been warning for a long time, it's a 100% chance that our grid will sustain the effects of a geomagnetic disturbance, solar weather, at some point in the future. We cannot escape that.
And that geomagnetic disturbance is a naturally occurring phenomenon. Solar flares, I guess, is kind of the layman's term for it, but that has an effect on unshielded electronic equipment, very like something called an electromagnetic pulse attack, something that's deliberate and highly destructive. Is that right?
That's right. That's right, Frank. So the way that the sun can affect the grid is it produces the visual piece is a solar flare, as you mentioned, but what comes behind it is what's called a coronal mass ejection. It's these highly magnetized charged particles that travel through space. And what happens when they hit the Earth and the Earth's magnetosphere, it causes it literally to move and wobble, and that induces currents into the crust of the Earth. You think about the movement of electricity, it always chooses the path of least resistance. And that path, a lot of times, is going to be long conductors like our transmission lines. And so part of what I explained that very fact to the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board, but I also explained the transparently defective standard currently established by the industry and approved by the federal government for the protection of that grid. And Frank, my written testimony, I went through and I explained, which I'm happy to do for your viewers, but I also did that in my article published at our website.
Great. Well, I commend it to you all. It's at securefreedom.org. And Tommy, I guess the key point here is that if, as you say, there's 100% certitude that there will be one of these powerful electromagnetic disturbances coming off of the sun boresighted on the Earth. It happens roughly, as I understand it, every 150 years, and the last time was 1859, so we're overdue.
Right.
And the question, I guess, is if the standard is deficient at the moment, are steps being taken to enhance that standard so that a greater degree of resiliency is provided to the grid to meet this now absolutely certain, predictable disaster?
Frank, to answer that question, the steps that would need to be taken to fix it will only happen with pressure, with mounting pressure from the public and from scientists. Now, thankfully, there are world class scientists that just last month published a report about what we now know the field strengths were from another solar storm, one considered a 40-year storm. So it's not as strong as the one you referenced in 1859, which is known as a 100-year storm. A 40-year storm is less impactful, yet what they found was that it induced a current into the Earth's crust in the vicinity of Virginia that was, and you can see it in my testimony, 19 volts per kilometer would build up along a transmission line. That means a 100-kilometer transmission line, you're getting almost 2,000 volts. But when you look at the standard that's been established, the standard established by NERC and approved by FERC, they start at 8 and they scale down. So in Virginia, a utility would only need to protect against 2 volts per kilometer. So
Tommy,
you're
we
looking
have to
at,
ask you to hold this thought because we're down into a little bit of the weeds on this, but we want
sure,
to pick up on it on the other side of the very short break. Lieutenant
absolutely.
Colonel Tommy Waller, United States Marine Corps Reserves, is with us, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what we need to do to protect the grid that we all depend upon critically. That and more straight ahead.